All right, You People is a Netflix movie that just came out a couple weeks ago, starring Eddie Murphy, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Jonah Hill, and Lauren London. Jonah Hill and Lauren London are Ezra and Amira in the movie, and they're a mixed race couple who both have issues with each other's family in a sort of guess who's coming to dinner style comedy. And I was pretty surprised by it in a good way. It was pretty funny and a little bit edgier than a lot of stuff that's coming out right now. But the messaging of the movie I thought was strange overall. I would say it's worth watching. At least it's got some good cringe humor if you're into that, and a little bit of edgy humor if you're into that. It's not the best movie I've ever seen, but I thought the messaging in the movie was really strange and almost kind of contradictory for I thought what should be a pretty straightforward, simple movie. So I'm going to talk about it. I guess there'll be spoilers, but there's not much to spoil with this type of movie. It's a rom com, so all right, like and subscribe and all that shit. Let's get into it. It's a pretty typical rom com plot. Jonah Hill comes from a wealthy Jewish family and doesn't really want to live that lifestyle. The movie starts out with them at temple. So obviously his family's religious, or at least goes to the services for their social status or whatever. And he's clearly not into it. He's all tattooed up, which, if you don't know, is pretty much forbidden for Orthodox Jews because the whole body is a temple thing. And he's working as some kind of finance cubicle desk job that his family got him into, but he also does a podcast with a black lady and doesn't want to do the finance job. So he orders an Uber to leave his finance job and gets the driver mixed up with the main chick, Amira. And they end up hitting it off and hooking up. They flash forward a few months and he wants to marry her, introducing her to the family and that type of thing. So she's from a middle class or working class black family who's one of the Nation of Islam types. It's not clear if she's into it or not. Jonah Hill brings Amira to meet Shelley, who's his mom, or Julia Louise Dreyfus, or Elaine. I'll probably just call her Elaine because that's the easiest. So Elaine is doing the thing that white people who are uncomfortable around black people do, where they try to bring up like things that they think black people can relate to. So like the first time they meet, she tries to get right into like police brutality and how fucked up the police are. And, it's the type of thing where she means well, but she's obviously being pretty racist. Jonah Hill's dad is David Duchovny, and I actually thought he was pretty funny in this. Because for whatever fucking reason, he keeps trying to bring up Exhibit and Pimp My Ride and stuff. I think just because Amir is black and has braids. But mainly it's Elaine who's the source of the cringe. So Jonah Hill meets Amira's parents, who are Eddie Murphy, and I don't remember the wife's name. And Eddie Murphy goes by Akbar because he's like one of the Nation of Islam Muslim practicing people. And Eddie Murphy's not having it. He acts like a total dick to Jonah Hill and pretty much does everything he can to try to get rid of him and make him uncomfortable. He takes him to areas where he's the only white guy. And he takes him to play basketball. He's a fat, short Jewish guy. And I guess it's supposed to be the hood. It doesn't look like a terrible area. They kind of imply it is at one point by saying it's dangerous to wear certain colors and stuff. And he just acts like a big dick the whole movie. And he's much more openly racist, where Elaine is more well-meaning but ignorant, I guess. So this carries on, and there's shenanigans throughout and whatever. Jonah Hill lies quite a bit about the kind of stuff that he's into, which gets him in trouble sometimes. Eventually, they call off their engagement because their families are such assholes, which I found to be pretty strange. I think it would have made more sense to have it cause a fight between them. I mean, it does cause little fights with them throughout the movie, but they're resolved pretty quickly. And they both pretty much say when they want to break up, like, I can't deal with your family. And I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Like my in-laws are fine, but they're not such a part of our life that I consider breaking up over it. But maybe it's different if you live near them. I don't know. They eventually call off the engagement, and down the road, a few months, fast forward again, Eddie Murphy realizes he was an asshole suddenly, contacts Elaine. They make up and get Jonah Hill and Amira back together. They get married. Everybody realizes that race doesn't matter. Happy ending. Woo. So the story's, I would say, generic at this point. But the reason I found the movie fascinating is because of the messaging of the movie. So, like I said, the humor is pretty cringe, especially with Elaine, because she's so condescending and clearly doing like she's happy to have the almost like a token black daughter-in-law type thing. It's really weird. I would bet almost anything that the person who wrote this lives in one of these predominantly upper class, far left wing areas and is in these social circles because it seemed like they were writing from personal experience. And Elaine in particular, like thinks that she's being really nice, but really it's more of like a social status thing. Be like, oh, my son is in an interracial relationship or a mixed race relationship. I can't remember if she actually says we get to have mixed race babies at one point in the movie or mixed race grandbabies. Yeah, it's pretty obvious what she's doing. Like I said, the dad's not as bad. He's just kind of a lump, but he's still kind of awkward. Although I did think the exhibit thing was really funny, even though it was really stupid. Something I thought was interesting too, though, with this is instead of a black and white family, they did black and Jewish. And I'm just speculating here, I don't know. But I think they did black and Jewish and didn't want to do a white family. Even though they refer to them as white, they're Jewish. I don't know. It's one of those things where sometimes Jews are white people and sometimes they're just Jews. I think the reason they weren't just, European descent white people is because of the mentality that's pretty common for a lot of people right now that you can't be racist toward white people. So, if that's the worldview that you have, then this movie wouldn't function because you need both families to be racist. And something else I thought was pretty surprising was Eddie Murphy praises Louis Farrakhan. You can look him up yourself if you don't know who he is. He's like one of maybe the highest up in this Nation of Islam religion. Well, I'm not going to get into all the details, but Elaine says at the first dinner they all had together when Eddie Murphy asks if they're familiar with the works of Reverend Farrakhan, she says, I'm familiar with his opinions on the Jews. Because if you don't know, he's pretty rabidly anti Semitic. And he never really gets called out for it in media or like mainstream news or anything. So I thought that was bizarre, but also really interesting. So there was like the weird element that I thought was interesting. But the other part that I thought was interesting was the movie has what I would say is mixed messaging. Because obviously the point of the movie is it doesn't matter who you are on the outside, on the inside that matters, and race doesn't matter, and all that type of thing. I would say pretty just basic messaging at this point. But I thought what made it weird though is that Jonah Hill and Amira are obviously the protagonist. Elaine is sort of like, I would say just a side character. I wouldn't say she's good or bad. And then Eddie Murphy is clearly the antagonist because you have Jonah Hill and Eddie Murphy going back and forth with each other. Is a lot of the movie where Amira is more just uncomfortable with Elaine, but Elaine's not trying to be a bitch. But then you have these scenes where Jonah Hill's podcast partner, who's the black chick, just flat out says white people and black people can never get along. And Jonah Hill and Elaine both flat out say, I'll never know what it's like to be a black person in this country. And I guess in the most literal sense, that's true. But I don't really like that kind of messaging in a movie where the message is that race shouldn't matter or doesn't matter. Obviously they get married. In general, this isn't like a hard and fast rule, but usually you have your protagonist say the things that you want the audience to agree with. And the antagonist is the one who says the things that are either wrong or at least more questionable. And the way that the movie is framed, Jonah Hill and Amir are the protagonists. So when you have Jonah Hill say these kind of things, it's like, well, what's the message of the movie that I'm supposed to be taking away then? Like if you have Eddie Murphy say this, that white people and black people will never get along, it's very easy to say, okay, well, he's the asshole. The audience isn't supposed to agree with that message. And actually, Jonah Hill does say that he's an asshole near the end of the movie. But he prefaces it with, I'll never know what it's like to be black. And then he says, but I know what an asshole is. Which is, a fine line, but I think it's kind of contradictory. And the reason I don't like it is no one's going to know what it's like to be someone from a different race in the most literal sense. there's sort of this implication that underlies it that we can't empathize with people because of skin color. The message of the movie is simultaneously saying race is such a big deal, I can never understand you. But the point of the movie is race shouldn't matter. Or maybe even more overtly, race doesn't matter because they get married anyway. And, if you really extrapolate this, you could say that people can't empathize with the opposite sex and on and on and on, however specific you want to get. It's frustrating to me because how many people play Mass Effect and their favorite character isn't human? Like everyone loves Garrus and Tally. How many people watched Iron Giant and loved the Iron Giant, or Fox and the Hound and loved the characters, where the characters are animals? But you understand that the point isn't that they're animals, it's about friendship. So I just don't like this line of thought, and it really seems inappropriate to me in a movie where the message is race is irrelevant. And to me, this is kind of where you can see the politics of the writers slipping in a little bit, because it seems like they have a message that they personally believe, which is white people can never understand black people. But then they also have the message that they're trying to push where race doesn't matter or shouldn't matter. I'm not going to get too much into the political stuff, but, black people were enslaved in America, treated pretty shittily throughout American history. But people all have obstacles that they face that they can relate to, or challenges that they think are unfair, or whatever the case is, that you can relate to other people. Would the conversation be better? And this is actually a pretty funny part in the movie where Jonah Hill's dad says that the Jews were kind of the OG slaves because of the stuff in Egypt. And it's like, that is the kind of unproductive mindset that this shit leads to. Like, can you relate to black people better today if you trace your lineage back throughout history and find out how many of them were peasants and slaves? Because the reality is that the world historically has been a shitty place. And in many ways, it still is. If you want to look up modern day slavery or labor practices in fucking China or Africa or whatever, look at the sources that your cobalt's mined from and how they use child labor and follow no labor laws or environmental, and there's complete disregard for the environment. And that's kind of the point that I was getting at when I said I don't like this whole thing where we just assume we can't empathize with people because of skin color. It really gets under my skin, pun intended. So yeah, I don't know. The movie I thought was entertaining. It wasn't overtly political. They do have some of the shit that I talked about in there, where you don't know what it's like to be black and all that type of thing. Not the worst as far as politics seeping into movies these days, but it's there a little bit. But, if you have a night where you're just chilling and not doing much, or if you want to have someone to Netflix and chill with, I think it's worth putting on. It's not going to change your life, and you're not going to suddenly realize that racism is wrong or anything, which I'm sure is what the writers want to happen. But, it's worth watching once at least. So that's it for me with this one. I hope that Netflix keeps coming out with, decent movies and they loosen up a little bit with the humor. Because I enjoyed the humor in this one. They made some jokes I was a little bit surprised by. So, you got a couple hours to kill. Go check it out. All right. Thanks. See you.